She would send a cloud of smoke out into the black and white night, dense and full of meaning, interpretable. "He's a boy who died," she said flatly, picking up her pencil, but there were real tears in her eyes, for she wasn't selfish, she wasn't unfeeling, she wasn't. But were the tears for Teddy or for her? Were they for what she'd lost or what she'd done? She hadn't given a thought to the cocaine. She'd nearly forgotten about it, barely 2 lines apiece, until the look Johnny had given her there at the edge of the park, the phone hanging limply in his hand, her nostrils burning in the cold. Teddy was a big boy, she told herself. He could have said no. If only he'd gotten on that train with her. She had wanted to make something happen. She had asked for heartbreak, and she'd gotten it. And it was bigger than anything in her life. She wanted to forget Teddy, and she wanted something to remember him by. She was aware of this paradox in a subliminal way, and of Johnny's and Jude's part in it. She wanted to know them too. She wanted to forget them. She tried hard to drown them out. She ignored the blank page of her underwear, didn't count the days, thought past and around and through them. If she occupied her brain, if only we may be kill the goat. She could think herself out of it, because she couldn't be. There was no fucking way. So the last section that I will read is Johnny's section. Johnny is Teddy's older brother, half-brother, who's left Vermont a couple years before and hasn't been in a lot of touch with Teddy, but has learned what's happened to him and is now trying to digest that in the months after his death. The thing was, no one in New York knew Teddy was dead, because no one in New York had known Teddy existed. New York was its own solar system. Maybe once Sid or Kevin had seen a letter hanging around, had said, "Hey, who's this from?" And Johnny'd said, "My kid brother." Maybe not. Maybe someone had said, "Hey, Johnny, you got any family?" And maybe Johnny, keeping it simple, had said, "Not really." He'd left Teddy with his mom so he could live with his dad, and after his dad went to jail, Johnny didn't go home. He was doing his own thing. He'd send Teddy a mixtape now and then, a Subway token with the center cut out. Now the Subway token was gone. Who knew where? Through January, into February, in Chuck Taylors and undershirt, over cracked sidewalks, under claws of elms, Johnny skated. He tried to get lost, make a maze of the city, turned north, then left, then right, then west, chased a bumper sticker, a blue jay, turned up the volume on his Walkman. Through both sides of minor threats, out of step, and through both sides again, through paradise and slum, past falafel cart and flower shop and carriage ride, over cobblestone and manhole, past brownstone and mirrored steel, past Les Keffy's lavender Dodge van on a different block each week, the parking tickets on the windshield faded and dried like autumn leaves, past the vacant, piss-stinking newsstand, past one building that had burned down, past another, past the dealers and the crackheads and the squeegee men, past every bum who knew his name, past every thug who'd stared him down. Go ahead, asshole, kill me. But no one did, and always when he stopped, lungs packed full, expelling white breath into the air, there would be the city, inexorable and vast, and a subway station that threatened to lead him home. He skated to the river, to the bodega, to Venus, or Sounds, or Some Records, or Bleecker Bob's, or Angelica Kitchen, or across the Williamsburg Bridge to the Hare Krishna Temple in Brooklyn, to shows at CBGB, the Ritz, the Pyramid, the Limelight, Irving Plaza, ABC No Rio, Wetlands, Tramps, skating home in the dark, bruised and frosty with sweat, standing under the shower head until the water went cold. He did push-ups and sit-ups and chin-ups, up, 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 cleaned the mini fridge, fed the cats, made the bed, made a pot of chamomile tea, teapot whistling on the hot plate, the space heater and the stereo and the tattoo machine, the mouth of the guy he was tattooing, staring down the needle for hours, at hair follicle and inky vein, busy, 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 and the mouths of all the guys in his band and all their amplifiers, as much noise as was electronically possible without blowing the circuits. That was the trick. Sometimes his skateboard would take him to the southern point of Manhattan, and he'd look out over the bay past the dollar green Lady Liberty to the distant biscuit of Staten Island. Somewhere over there was the Arthur Kill Correctional Facility, where his father and uncle lived. Now that his mother had disappeared and his brother was dead, they were the only family he had left. But his father was dead to him too, as dead as his mother had told him he was in the first place. For his antiseptic lifestyle, plus the white t-shirt, bald head, and gold hoops, Johnny had been dubbed by his friends Mr. Clean. He hadn't had a drink or eaten meat or smoked a cigarette in almost 2 years. There was no reason to start now. The sannyasis at the Hare Krishna temple promised that renunciation of desires brought peace. Thanks. Thank you. I'm very, very happy to answer any questions.
Some of viewers have pointed out that in Vermont, maybe Burlington, is it? And if so, what made you change?
Well, indeed it is. I don't think it's much of a secret for anyone who's familiar with Burlington that Lintonburg is a kind of alternative reality for Burlington. And in early drafts, Lintonburg was Burlington, and I spent some energy trying to capture what it might have been like in 1988 to be one of these kids growing up in a pretty small town, in comparison to this bigger cityscape that we get to later. I remember emailing my cousin over here who indeed grew up in Burlington during that time, just trying to get the details. And at one point I realized that it didn't really matter that I got those details right. I think maybe the real turning point was when I got some feedback from a peer in my workshop at the University of Virginia. She went to UVA with me, and she grew up in Burlington, and she made a comment on a manuscript saying, they really don't have school buses in Burlington. Do you want me to tell you stuff like this? And I realized, it didn't matter if there are school buses or not in Burlington. And what really was important to me was to get New York right, because you can't really fictionalize New York. It sort of belongs to everybody. It's mythic, and I knew that I wanted to capture that place. And I actually read an interview. This is a long way to answer your question, with Richard Price afterward, who kind of confirmed my feeling about this. And he fictionalizes a town called Dempsey in New Jersey, I guess. And he said it didn't matter what that other place was. It was the other place. It was the not New York that mattered. And so capturing the not New Yorkness of the small town in Vermont was what was important to me. And so I had some fun at that point when I let myself just, turn it into an anagram and sort of capture some of the details, but really just, capture the setting at large. Yeah. Well, I don't know that I did. I mean, that was certainly my entry point into my interest in the period, but I certainly couldn't have written the book without the influence of my husband, who more or less grew up here. His mother lived on St. Mark's Place for 25 years, and that's where I spent a lot of my time. We'd go down to St. Mark's every Sunday for dinner when we lived here, and so I was very interested in that place and that period. I mean, it's a whole world in itself, that one block between 2nd and 3rd Avenue down there, and hearing the stories from my husband's family about how changed the city was just over the course of 10 or 20 years was just fascinating to me, and it also happened to be the setting of the straight edge subculture. So having his stories to base this world on, I think was the most invaluable part of the research process. And then there was sort of more traditional research, listening to radio documentaries and and reading newspapers and books and talking to people who'd been here at the time. But I think that's part of the reason why it took me so long to write the book, because I was afraid of not getting New York right, because it, so many people have access to it that that you don't want to get the details wrong.
Who are some of your favorite writers? How have you seen them influence your writing?
I would probably say that the two books that most influenced this book are Michael Chabon's Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay and Jonathan Letham's The Fortress of Solitude. I mean, those were two books that were really on my mind when I read the book and, when I wrote the book and before I wrote the book. So, what appealed to me are the things that, that I end up kind of transferring into the book. So, like, the kind of do-it-yourself attitude of a bunch of young boys in both books who try to make a moment, and the prose as well, just the exuberance of the prose that captures the exuberance of that era. Those were two writers who are on my mind who I admire a lot. So that's the short answer. I'll leave it at that. Hi. It was long and torturous. But I'm glad that it was long. I started writing the book, when I lived here just for a year in 2001, 2002. Started writing it on the subway in a little moleskin notebook, and realized that I wanted to tell a book about a straight-edge kid and an adopted kid and about New York and about Vermont, and all that stuff kind of coalesced over a first draft. And then I produced most of the first draft during my 2 years at the University of Virginia, and got a lot of strong feedback. But I knew after I finished a draft that, I had a mess on my hands. It was a big book. It was 540 pages, and it was all in Jude's point of view, so it was really claustrophobic. And, I love Jude, but, you can only take so much dude talk. So I realized that I had to break it open into more points of view, and I kind of got addicted to that and kept opening it up to more points of view. Over many drafts, and that was great. That was great fun, and I think that panoramic perspective is sort of a really intrinsic part of the book now. So I'm glad that I took the time, even though I was kind of torturing myself about how long it was taking, to let myself realize that this kind of had a bigger book in it than just the story of a 16-year-old kid coming of age. So it took about 9 years in all, and then I had fabulous readers along the way from my peers at the University of Virginia and outside, and all the way up to my agent and editor who really helped me to tame it down. Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, is it all through instinct? So when is it instead of having you?
Mm-hmm. I'm a real fan of the third person. I'm a real fan. I just love what it can do. I think that it can. Cody, you're smiling back there, one of my students, because I'm always pushing the third person, and she's a first person addict. And I respect you, Cody. However, I really like that the third person can. It can allow you the same interior access as a first person, and I think even more, because there's a sort of impartiality to the voice. And Jude as a 16-year-old, I think it would kind of be nightmarish to hear this guy try to articulate his own experience. When you're 16 and you're going through this very vulnerable transition anyway, and then he's on top of that, like, coming in and out of drugs throughout the book. I don't know that he'd have the language to be able to express that. Maybe from an adult perspective he would. But I love what the third person can do in terms of just providing that access to a number of different heads. I suppose I could have had a multiple first-person novel, and there are some that are successful, but I wanted to have an omniscient narrator who could open up the heads of